Being born in the South, many voters viewed Zachary Taylor as someone who would be pro-slavery, so much so that 6 pro-slave Southern states voted him in as president, despite the Democratic candidate Lewis Cass being openly supportive of expanding slavery into Northern states. Zachary Taylor was elected into office as an outsider. Before the presidency, Taylor had never held any political office, did not publicly make any political statements, and in fact never even voted in a presidential election until he voted for his first and only time for himself, trying to admit California and New Mexico, both much larger states at the time, as free states. California and New Mexico would have engulfed the modern states of Arizona, Nevada, Utah, and parts of Colorado and Wyoming as free states, but wanted to do so by bypassing Congress so that Taylor could get them admitted with slavery banned in the land. Zachary Taylor also promised that as president he would ban slavery on federal land if a bill ever reached his desk, but due to his untimely death, one never did. Zachary Taylor was also a non-interventionalist who refused to take over Cuba, despite much of the U.S. wanting him to. One thing that Taylor did get done was the passing of the Clayton-Bulwer Treaty with Great Britain that laid the groundwork for the eventual construction of the Panama Canal. The main provisions of the treaty were that first, there would be no exclusive control, neither country would be able to monopolize the canal. Neutrality, the canal would remain open to all shipping on a neutral basis. No fortification, neither side would fortify or militarize the surrounding area, and lastly, anti-colonization. Neither power would occupy or assume control over any part of Central America. This treaty prevented war and was the starting framework for the building of the Panama Canal before it was repealed in 1901, with the United States gaining exclusive rights to build and manage the canal themselves. President Zachary Taylor's cause of death is unknown to this very day, with speculations that someone had put arsenic poisoning in his food or beverages because he was staunchly opposed to the expansion of slavery. But after the exhumation of his body in 1991, professionals concluded that his cause of death was not arsenic due to the levels of arsenic in his body being normal. The leading theory at the time, and still a common explanation for his death, was that he had contracted the stomach flu, or at the time what they thought was cholera, from the large amounts of consumption of iced milk with cherries on a hot summer day during a 4th of July celebration. He fell ill and then 5 days later died. Along the same lines, there is another popular explanation that it was not the milk or cherries that had caused the stomach flu, but rather contaminated water he drank due to the hot weather and poor sewage system that the country had at the time. Welcome to Bar Trivia Facts of Zachary Taylor. The facts that will never help you in history class, but maybe in a trivia game. First, one of the only 2 elected presidents under the Whig Party and one of only 4 total Whig presidents. Zachary Taylor was also the second ever presidential death in office, following the only ever elected Whig, William Henry Harrison. He was the third shortest time as president at 1 year, 127 days. Mr. Taylor served in War of 1812, Black Hawk War, and Second Seminole War, and as a major general during the Mexican-American War. He was the last president to be born before the signing of the Constitution, and the only president to ever have his body formally exhumed. Millard Fillmore signed and heavily enforced what is likely the most pro-slavery piece of legislation passed by any U.S. president in our nation's history. The act mandated that all escaped enslaved people be returned to their owners, forcing citizens and officials in free states to assist in capture, meaning not only that slaves that escaped would be returned to their abusive masters, but that citizens and law enforcement in states where slavery was illegal would be federally required to capture runaway slaves or face legal punishment themselves. Additionally, providing any food or shelter to an escaped slave would get the individual a 6-month prison sentence and a hefty fine of $1,000 in that time, which inflation adjusted today is about a $43,000 fine. Furthermore, people who were caught as being alleged former slaves would not receive due process, and their fate was solely determined by a commissioner. The defendant was not allowed to testify, and juries were not permitted. Commissioners were also given a government incentive to determine everyone at trial was a runaway slave, since the commissioner would be paid double, pocketing an extra $200 in today's money. This combined with officers capturing alleged escaped slaves getting bonuses and promotions for recaptures, making a system where free men were kidnapped and put into slavery. Zachary Millard Fillmore also pushed for the building of the Transcontinental Railroad. He completed the construction of the Erie Railroad and started a railroad from Chicago, Illinois to Mobile, Alabama, making significant feats in transport by rail. Millard Fillmore also appointed Brigham Young to become the first ever governor of Utah in order to maintain healthy relations between the Mormons and the federal government. However, as a governor, he ruled dictatorially, was a strong advocate of slavery for blacks and Native Americans in Utah, and led to the Utah War, which I will discuss more in my video about James Buchanan. Millard Fillmore also officially banned the slave trade in Washington, D.C. This did not stop, however, the trading of slaves, or make Washington, D.C. a slave-free area, but rather just forbid the public selling of slaves in the capital, essentially just causing auctions and trading of slaves to be moved to other parts of the United States of America. Millard Fillmore successfully admitted California into the USA as a free state, but not as the superstate that Zachary Taylor, his predecessor, had envisioned. Through negotiations and standing firm, Millard Fillmore helped prevent the annexation of Hawaii by France, which Napoleon III was very fond of. Fillmore struck a deal with Great Britain and France to maintain neutrality when it comes to Hawaii and have them keep their independence, although, as we'll see with later presidents, the thirst for Hawaii in America grew very strong. Also, instead of threatening or using military strength, Millard Fillmore had diplomatic disputes regarding monetary claims for damages to U.S. war vessels settled via international arbitration by a third party, resulting in a payment by the Portuguese of $91,727, or roughly $4 million in today's money, in 5 annual installments, finally ending the decades-long dispute and tensions with the country of Portugal. Fillmore furthermore sent out Commodore Matthew Perry and the Navy to make an expedition to Japan and open free trade with them, to bring Japan out of their 200-plus years of isolation, via negotiations and gifts of alcohol, rifles, and a functional railroad set. As a result of the kind gestures and negotiations, the Treaty of Kanagawa was signed, opening trading ports with Japan, hospitable treatment to shipwrecked American soldiers, and a friendship which lasted to this very day. Finally, Fillmore proactively avoided conflict with Cuba and Spain, which was the country which owned the territory of Cuba. Fillmore refused to support armed groups, often organized by Southern adventurers who attempted to launch invasions to take over Cuba. Fillmore took action to prevent private expeditions led by Narciso Lopez from leaving U.S. shores because Narciso Lopez was constantly trying to invade and capture Cuba from Spanish rule. Lastly, Fillmore, despite criticism from many Southerners and some Northerners, formally apologized to Spain for the attempted invasions of Cuba, which helped ease tensions between America and Spain and maintain peaceful relationships for the future. It's that time again. More bar trivia facts of Millard Fillmore. Millard Fillmore was the last president to be unaffiliated with either the Republican or Democratic Party, serving as the last Whig. Established the first library in the White House. His favorite dish was mock turtle soup, and Millard Fillmore married his high school teacher, Abigail Powers. Today, Zachary Taylor is only really remembered for his curious death, rather than his strong anti-slavery stance as president or his great military leadership. Although Taylor had great ideals, it is still a question of in office if he could accomplish those goals, given such a divided nation and Zachary Taylor's lack of political experience and knowledge. Another question is whether the enforcement of Zachary Taylor's actions would have sped up the coming Civil War, and would an earlier Civil War actually be a bad thing? Fillmore today is simply not remembered, despite all the major actions he took as president, including but not limited to the Fugitive Slave Act, opening the trade and friendly relations with Japan, building of railroads, and maintaining foreign neutrality and peace. The Fugitive Slave Act is unequivocally an awful piece of legislation passed as part of the package deal that was the Compromise of 1850, which also included the admission of California as a free state and a largely ineffective ban on the slave trade in Washington, D.C. Some argue, though, that the deal was necessary to keep a civil war between the North and South at bay, while others argue it only fueled the fire. No matter how you shake it, Fillmore had accomplished many great foreign accomplishments, but his domestic policy was rocky at best. Let me know in the comments your thoughts on these two men and your opinions on their actions, as well as other important actions or important information that I missed. And as always, thanks for watching.